Welcome to Dating at Her Age. Caitlyn, you and I decided to dedicate an entire episode to a topic that affects a lot of people who are dating, stalking. Not only stalking, but also harassment. You know, those text messages that keep coming in even though you broke it off weeks ago, but you feel like they've crossed the line into harassment. Or maybe somebody is showing up at your work uninvited, and you told them a long time ago that you had no interest in continuing the relationship. We sat down with two members of the Salt Lake City Police Department who work cases here in Utah specifically related to domestic violence and stalking and electronic harassment, which again are those text messages, those unwanted text messages that you keep getting bombarded with, to talk about what is stalking, what crosses the line into harassment, what are the red flags, and what can we legally do about it?
I think these types of issues push a lot of people away from dating. Either you've experienced something yourself in the past, or you've just heard stories from your friends or just strangers out there about the dangers of people crossing the line. So I am excited to share a lot of the tips that they provided on ways you can protect yourself even beforehand when you go into the dating world, because I think there's a lot of valuable information.
While we were talking about it, you brought up some scenarios where a good friend of yours felt like she was being stalked. I also brought up some scenarios that I felt clearly crossed the line. And I also talk about how I emotionally wrestled with what to do about it because I didn't want to cause a big firestorm and create even more problems for myself. But both the sergeant and the victim's advocate, who works directly with victims of domestic violence and of stalking, walked us through what our options are, what stalking is, and what harassment is, so we can protect ourselves while dating. So let's talk to Wendy Isom, who's the Director of Victim Services with the Salt Lake City Police Department here in Utah, and also Sergeant Liz Johnson, also with the Salt Lake City Police Department. Sergeant Johnson, before we really dive into the details, what role do you play and what unit are you in with the Salt Lake City Police Department?
I'm currently assigned to the domestic violence unit, and we investigate any stalking, harassment cases, obviously anything that has to do with domestic violence.
And Wendy, tell us just in a nutshell, what does a victim's advocate do when they work with the police department and with victims?
So mostly we're serving as a liaison between a criminal justice system and a survivor or a victim who's experiencing something traumatic or violent or scary. And our goal is to come in and help find resources, increase safety, and then navigate a system that isn't always very victim friendly.
We're so grateful you're talking to us about this, because in today's dating world, where we've often said this on our podcast, Caitlyn, that we're meeting perfect strangers online. And then sometimes even people you know or you get connected through friends of friends can turn out to have other ideas in mind. Maybe they harass or they become a stalker. And you and I have talked about this off the podcast, Caitlyn, about how scary it can be not knowing how to navigate this.
Yeah, and I think that the digital world has opened this up even broader, and that's something that I'm afraid of and why I think I am. It's a hesitation of mine to be on the dating apps and stuff like that, just because there's a whole world that's looking at you. And so I think this is a really important topic.
Wendy, let's start with the real basic definition of what stalking is.
So typically stalking is a pattern of behavior, sometimes called a course of conduct, but it's more than one event, 2 or 3 times, where an individual's behavior causes someone emotional distress or fear for their safety.
2 to 3 times. See, I think in some people's minds it would have to happen 20 to 30 times.
So most statutes here in Utah, it's 2 or 3. Most states, it is just defined as a pattern or a course of conduct, which most courts define a little differently. For civil court, for getting a stalking injunction, it might be as little as 2. And for criminal charges, it might be more like 3 or 4.
When someone decides to stalk someone, I guess, in your experience, is it just an obsession? Is there mainly a threat? I know it's going to be different per situation, but How extensive can that danger be?
So that's a hard question to answer. Typically, our survivors, the victims, the person going through the experience, is often a better expert to help us understand why it's causing them fear. If it's someone I've just broke up with, that might be really dangerous compared to a stranger that just gives me a weird vibe. But when we don't know, we always err on the side of caution. We can always safety plan and overestimate the risk at very little cost to time and effort, but then we get it right. If that offender is dangerous, we've got a good plan. And if that offender wasn't dangerous, then maybe all we did was have a good conversation and be thoughtful and mindful, but we didn't do anything that is too taxing. So I just trust if someone's coming to me and saying, I'm a little scared or this doesn't feel right, trust that instinct and let's plan to that and make sure that we're not underestimating a risk.
Sergeant, I think with the way we're dating now online through dating apps, and like I've said a million times, we're meeting perfect strangers and then they can communicate with us over the dating app. Sometimes we choose to move off the dating app over to text, or maybe they identify us on social media. So now they have access to our social media DMs and can private message and find out more information about us. What are the different, kind of describe the different forms of stalking and how it can present itself? Because I think back in the day, when I was dating, way before dating apps, you might think of somebody showing up at your door or showing up at your work unannounced and consistently, like kind of jumping out of the bushes. But talk to us about what you're seeing in this kind of newer digital age.
Well, we have what is called electronic harassment, where someone is constantly sending you messages, unwanted messages. They may be soliciting photos from you or asking inappropriate questions. Anytime that's happening and it's making you feel uncomfortable, you can always call and make a police report. Initially, it might just be a police report where we're documenting. And something that you can do is the police can always contact that individual and tell them to stop for you. And we'll document all of that they've been told to stop. I would recommend saving all messages, saving all communication, pictures, whatever you have, because all of that will help you if it escalates. Generally, if a police officer calls and says you need to stop, it does stop. But there are some cases where it continues. And if it continues, it's important to call back and let police know this is continued behavior. And then we can escalate how we're going to react to that, whether it's filing charges or whatever. When you're on the dating apps, you just need to be cognizant of what is being shared. I know that some dating apps they have your location data, because they're kind of giving you options of people that are near you. So just be cognizant of that. Or, for example, Snapchat, it'll share your location and people can see that unless you're physically turning it off. So stuff like that I think is important. But I would call over the dating apps is more of an electronic harassment. It can escalate to stalking. That's more kind of where we're starting at. That's what that is.
Speaking about social media, for location, I'm glad you brought that up because it's obvious to me. I have all my location off. I have my Snapchat in ghost mode. It wasn't always that way until
you said ghost mode?
It's called
Caitlyn?
ghost mode
Okay.
on Snapchat, but there's other apps that can, you tag your location and stuff like that, but it's not active. But Snapchat, you literally can go and look at the live location of people. It's like a tracking app almost. But in regards to just social media in general, I think that a lot of people can be naive, myself included, until I started learning more about dangers. You learn and grow. But is there some sort of checklist or more tips that you could share on how we can make sure people cannot find personal information on our social media? Because it sometimes is like filling out a resume. Like you put your location there, your phone number sometimes, things like that. Any more advice to that?
Yeah, well, people have their birthdays on there. their full name. So once someone has your full name and your birth date, they can use other means to get more information about you. There's public records of your residence, or maybe even where your utilities are being sent. So I would not have my date of birth on social media. I have mine turned off. Your phone number, a lot of people have phone numbers attached to their Facebook. I would take that off. Privatize your Facebook. Privatize your Instagram. I know a lot of people, especially the younger generation, they want to gather the followers. And there's a lot of influencers or whatever, they're wanting a lot of likes. And so they're inviting everyone into their social media. And that can be extremely dangerous. And we've seen young teenagers being targeted online by either scammers or predators. So privatize all of that. When you're taking photos, don't tag your location. That's very common. You'll see, especially on Instagram, this photo was taken here, and you can literally just track people. If you're taking pictures of your house, don't take pictures of the front that shows your address. I've located people that way fairly easily. A lot of people will take pictures of their
Sergeant,
home.
I see that a lot too, and I want to reach out to them and say, take that photo down or blur that address.
And these are things you just don't think about. Sometimes you do it so quickly and you don't think twice about that because, it just slips through. There's so many things. Like, I think my birthday might be on my social media now. I need to go check that because I'm actually not sure.
Mine's not
sure.
because I'm 30 some odd years older than you, so I don't think it's on there, but it doesn't hurt to double check.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have a lot of fun with friends on a Tuesday night, grab a soda or a coffee or a cup of wine and look at your own profile with each other. Have someone go, if I didn't know you, what could I learn about you? Because sometimes we're so in our own posts that we don't think about it. But if this was an ex of an ex and you wanted to go see what was going on, you know how easy it is to track someone, look at what they're doing and what their friend circles are. Sit down and do that on your own. Or have a best friend or someone you trust go down the rabbit hole on your social media and see what they can find on you.
Become a mystery. I like that. One other thing that I see people do all the time, which I've done this as well, posting stories on, say, Instagram and tagging the location while they're still there. One thing that I've changed in the last few years is I don't do that unless I've left it. But I don't even want to do it at all anymore. But I see that all the time. While you're still there, you're tagging your location. And that's usually, it can be public if you have your Instagram public. So,
Wendy, I don't want to at all ignore the fact that I think this probably happens to men too. And I've had some situations that may not rise to the level of stalking under the definition of the law. And I'll share those in a bit. But let's not discount that men go through this too. And what do you see as a victim's advocate with the Salt Lake City Police Department when it happens to men? I just worry that they're going to be kind of too proud or nervous or embarrassed to report it. And I don't want that for them.
In my experience, there are some of those taboos or not wanting to appear weak or that I can't handle this on my own on all genders and different relationships. So absolutely, this is a crime that can cross every demographic. Doesn't matter how much a victim or a stalker makes, where they live, what their education level is. Some of these are bad breakups that turn into stalking, and really that can happen to anybody who's been in a relationship based on nothing other than an end of a relationship. So I would always invite male survivors to please reach out, because absolutely it is fairly common that my clients that I'm working with are male victims.
Sergeant, you want to add something to that as well in terms of female versus male and, how frequently, because I do want to always make sure that we're inclusive when it comes to this kind of discussion, to the fact that this could absolutely happen to anybody. I've had male friends in the past reach out to me and be like, I went on one date with a woman and now, she's all over my social media and I I'm worried that there is some sort of like embarrassment scale with men that they're like, oh, this, I just should take it. But I don't agree with, I think they should report it.
Absolutely. I think that it can become just as dangerous, regardless if you're male or female. Working in domestic violence, I do see, both sides of, victims, either male or female. It's I wouldn't say evenly distributed, but it does happen, and we treat that person just as we would. Sex doesn't matter. Gender does not matter when it comes to these things, because either person can be in just as much danger.
Do you think it more frequently happens, though, that females are the victim of harassment or stalking?
It's weird because yes, but at the same time, I do see quite a few male victims that are reporting harassment and stalking. When I was working in special victims with sexual assaults, I would see more female victims. But even then, I think that it's a lack of reporting, just for the reasons that you've already pointed out. What do you think, Wendy?
I see a little bit of a difference in why stalking happens in different situations. So sometimes females are stalked more from an offender trying to gain power and control over that individual, where some of my male clients, it's more an obsessive love interest and less about controlling that person and more about notice me, date me. I want to chase away the other girls that might be interested. Really, there's any vulnerability. I have clients in the LGBT community who might not be out. And so an offender might be able to stalk that individual a little more easily with a threat to out them. And so it's often just the stalker taking a look at vulnerabilities, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and what is their motivation for stalking. And there is a little bit of difference between different genders in the offender side. I don't see it as much on the victim side.
Well, thanks for that insight and perspective. I hadn't heard that before. But that's very, very telling.
And from the female perspective, I know that it wouldn't be a danger really, but I know that females, we can get into our heads and really get obsessive over a situation. And I know I've had friends who drive by guys' house just to check if they're home. Not anything threatening. They're just like, I wonder what they're doing. Gonna drive by their house. I know that happens. I know people, quote unquote, Facebook stalk just to get more information. So I can see that happening from a girl's perspective. Now, like I said, I don't think it's going to cause a danger. But if you're showing up at places because, they hang out at this bar more often and they notice that, I could see how men may feel threatened by that.
If they ask you to stop, and I've had to ask, I can think of one, maybe 2 times when I've had to ask a man to stop contacting me. Sergeant, maybe this question is for you. Is that the first step, is for somebody who feels uncomfortable or feels harassed to ask that person to stop? And that is just over like phone messages and stuff like that. I'm not suggesting if somebody stops by your door or is showing up at your work that's going to be adequate. But what is kind of the first step? What do you suggest of somebody who feels harassed or stalked do?
I think absolutely communicate that it's unwanted and I want you to stop. That being said, if this individual fears for their safety and doesn't want to contact that person, feels uncomfortable contacting that person, absolutely, law enforcement can do that for them. So, yes, if they feel confident enough that they can tell them to stop, that is the best step. And a lot of times it'll stop then. But if it continues after that, then I would contact law enforcement.
Yeah, my experience with this, the experience that comes to mind is I went on one date with a man and then I wasn't interested in a second. And he lit up my text messages. And what I'd wished in that moment is I hadn't shared my phone number with him, that I would have stayed on the dating app, because I felt that was a safety issue for me at that point. But I did feel comfortable. This is like well after the date. That's one of the things that I do is I don't say yes or no to a second date or third date when we're in person. I wait until I get home just so I can have a safe distance and not be around the person. But I did send back a text message asking him to stop, and I got maybe one or two texts back from him, but he did stop, and the issue went away. But there's been another occasion when I did have to call my local police department. I don't live in the Salt Lake City area, but it's another local police department where somebody that only knew me over social media showed up at my home. And immediately I was like, I think I know this guy somehow. And I wasn't quite sure how I knew him. But then through thick and thin, I was able to figure out where I knew him from. It was over social media messages. And he hadn't really sent me anything that I would have looked at that time as, oh, he's harassing me or is he stalking me over social media. But they were just direct messages over social media that I thought, those are odd. I don't feel really comfortable with those messages. Well, then next thing I know, he's in my front yard. And I did get law enforcement involved in that, and I've never heard from him again. So I've had two different stories where I felt extremely uncomfortable, one more so than the other when somebody's standing in your front yard. But I've had success. And at first, when I saw him there, I was like, oh, I don't want to escalate this. But then I thought, no, I got to follow my instincts. This is extremely uncomfortable. I don't know why he's here. He has no purpose to be here. And I got law enforcement involved, and I'm so grateful I did. Wendy, can you speak to that? Like that feeling that victims have in that moment of like, oh, I don't want to cause a scene.
And I would absolutely empower anybody who's feeling uncomfortable to take the action they feel is most appropriate. When I sit down with a survivor who's going through this, I try to give a continuum of choices or a big menu. And they can pick and choose whether you come in really strong with 6 different messages to leave me alone, or start with the subtle, smaller, please go away. And then know that I later can back that up with a police and a lawyer and a prosecutor and a judge if I need to. But those warning signs, those little creepy crawlies we get on the back of our neck when someone is making us uncomfortable, if there's one message I would say is trust that earlier. A lot of times, by the time someone's at our door asking us for help, it's been causing them to lose sleep, to change their patterns of behavior, to look over their shoulder for days and days and weeks. And it's taking a big toll out of the survivor by the time they come forward and ask for help. And maybe there are some steps we could offer earlier so that the offender gets that message quicker. That is the one consistent thing that seems to get a stalker to stop, is consistent messaging over and over that this is not acceptable behavior. Ideally, not always from the survivor, because if they keep being the only one to give that message, the offender's still getting to them and still getting some FaceTime and getting a reaction out of them. So at some point, letting other partners back them up and tell them, you need to stop calling this person, does really help.
If the stalker or harasser has some sort of mental illness, I don't know if that's common, does that change the way that you approach the situation? Does it make it harder? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So our statute here, and most statutes, it's refreshing. It's one of the times I think laws get it right. They put a lot of the power on the survivor to say when it's okay or not. And I think we have to do that in today's media, because I might be okay to text you 10 times and you're fine with that, but you might not want a guy you've been on one date with to text you 10 times. So the survivor gets to say what's okay and what's not okay. Or the individual who's just not sure. I'm not a victim yet, but I just want to say no.
I would say law enforcement, we're going to react to that the same. And in fact, if the person is suffering from a mental health condition, I would say that maybe it's escalated, because if their reality is distorted, I think that can become dangerous very quickly. So I would want to act on that actually quicker than a person of sane mind, if that makes sense.
On the other end, if an offender's trying to excuse away their behavior, or their friends and family are just saying, oh, they struggle, or they don't read social cues, or they're mentally ill, our statute says those aren't defenses. It says explicitly in Utah, not knowing that your behavior would freak someone out or them not telling you are not excuses that let that behavior be escaped from consequences. So just because someone has a mental health condition or is seeking medical treatment for mental health does not mean they're not responsible for that behavior. Clear down the road in the criminal justice system, it might come up and have to be addressed. Is this person competent? But that doesn't mean law enforcement can't help the victim be safe or help individuals stop the behavior long before we get to that point.
Plus, I just like to add this, that it's great to have another set of eyes and ears with the experience that both of you have. And I know there are police departments all over the country that have people with the same level of experience, victims advocates, victim specialists, domestic violence units, to help somebody who's going through this. And because I think the tendency, at least for me, has been like, I don't know, I don't want to cause a, like, what if, maybe I'll just give them a break. But when you walk through the door of the police department and say, or even sometimes if you ask a friend, hey, this is happening to me, they're the first ones to say, this is not normal. This is harassment. This is stalking, and you are being victimized. When we're in our own heads about it, I think for me, there's a tendency to minimize it. And that, we're trying to deal with the problem on our own. And quite frankly, we don't have the tools to deal with the problem on our own.
And I think that's very, very common. If I look back at what dating looked like in my younger days, I wish I had known at 18 and 21 and 23 what I know now, because I think some of those dating opportunities would have gone very differently if I knew what I could tell people no and how hard to push my own boundaries on another individual, and how lovely the police department could have been to help me with some of those that I didn't even know were criminal. I just thought it was me sometimes overreacting, sometimes being dramatic. And in retrospect, those were me learning how to trust those red flags, those icky feelings that really did tell me there was something not okay going on.
I think some of these issues can be brought up in, maybe you are in a relationship or early in dating someone, you can be kind of have the blinders on. Are there some things that are red flags, like, I don't know, obsessing over your location or reading text messages, something like that, that could also be seen as harassment or just obsessive, almost stalking behavior, but you're actually in a relationship with this person?
For sure. We see quite a bit of, especially within domestic violence or unhealthy dating relationships, one partner pressuring the other one to turn on location services. Individuals hacking in on someone else's Apple ID so they can just see where Find My Device shows where that person's phone is. Frequently, we're finding AirTags tucked away on vehicles, cars, friends' houses, stuffed animals, just any of those kind of gifts that might be traveling with someone. I do think different vendors have done a better job. I know Apple products now warn you that an AirTag has been traveling with you. But go on the internet and you can find a whole bunch of devices sold as ways to track your pets or autistic children or just any tracking device that can easily be put in very small spaces, left in someone's house, dropped in their car. And so absolutely those monitoring behaviors, wanting to read each other's text messages all the time, using location services when someone doesn't want to share that. Those can all be ways to control and monitor another human being.
Sergeant, on that note, that sounds super illegal, but to just put a tracking device in a car that might be owned by somebody you're dating, you have no ownership of it. Well, but you're the expert on that. What do you? That just sounds like that's just all kinds of trouble.
Yeah, I mean that's a gray area.
It just depends.
It just depends.
Okay.
It's really on a case by case.
But it's certainly a red flag.
It's absolutely a red flag. But as Wendy was talking, I was thinking, if you're in a relationship and you're seeing all these red flags, yes. But I also wonder if people that are in these relationships, they are seeing it, but it's embarrassing. If you're in this relationship and someone is treating you this way, I think we can all say that we've been in relationships where it wasn't really going the way we wanted to. It's not making us feel good, but we're not telling our mothers or our fathers. We're not telling our friends because it's embarrassing. We're just like, oh, it's all good. We have like the social media where it's all happy. This is a good relationship. It's fine. So I don't know if it's really that they're not seeing it, is that they just don't want to admit that this is happening, and they want it to just, we're going to pretend like everything is fine because it's embarrassing, and I don't want people to know that I allowed this to happen to me, which is inaccurate because you didn't allow this to happen to you. Someone is doing this to you. But I feel like it feels that way when you're in it. So I would just want to stress that, please talk to people. Please be honest about your relationships. Talk to people that you feel comfortable with, confide in them so that they can just kind of help nudge you in the right direction because, we're all in this. Everyone's felt this way in a relationship. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Anyways, I kind of went off on that, but
I think that's
important.
That's just critical. When you were saying that, I was thinking back, all the people I've talked to, relationships that I've experienced, and you're 100% spot on. If we just get to the point where we feel like we can confide in that trusted person, and it may be a best friend, it may be a parent, it may be a therapist that you're going to like. This feels really out of sorts for me. I get anxiety about this. This is how I'm treated. And letting somebody else can guide you on that. Like, no, you're right. This is the other thing is it's interesting that you brought that up because I've had calls from close friends in the past who've asked me like, this behavior seems so odd and it seems so weird. And this is usually what I say to them. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong to have said this over the years. And that is if you are changing something about your patterns or your life because you're getting scary text messages from somebody, or you feel like they're showing up at places that they don't belong, or you see them driving back and forth in front of your house and you don't want to go outside, you need to reach out for help because if you're altering your life in any capacity, or you're feeling like you have to get rid of one phone number to get another phone number, or you're shutting down social media, or you're just afraid to leave your home because you're afraid they're going to be out there, that to me is like a red flag. Sergeant, what would you say to that advice that I'm giving my friends?
I think that's great advice, and we all have a survival instinct within us, whether we're cognizant of it or not. If we're changing our phone number, if we feel like we need to always have our phone in our hand, because if we don't, then that person is going to look at it. Even small things like that. Yes, absolutely. That now it's something that's wrong.
The phone in your or you have to turn the phone upside down because you're afraid it's not that you're hiding anything, but you just adapt these behaviors because you're trying to avoid confrontation.
Yeah. Yeah. And what if, they might be controlling to the point where if you just have a friend of the opposite sex that is reaching out to you, and you know that that's going to cause an issue. If you feel you're walking on eggshells to keep this person happy so that there isn't an eruption of some sort, whether it's physical or emotional, anything like that. And if you just feel uncomfortable, like you were saying before, if you get the spidey sense on the back of your neck, listen to that, because our survival instinct is real, and it can tell us when something's wrong.
Well, you said if just a friend is reaching out to you, I've seen that happen so many times with my friends, and it's bothered me for years, but I just want to send this to all of them with that.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I can say is if you're feeling that early on in an app relationship or a dating relationship, trust it even more, because a good offender hides their worst traits on those first couple dates. We all want to make good impressions. We all pick out the cute outfit or, make those preparations to make sure a first meeting or a first date goes well. So if you're feeling these pretty early on, I would trust them most sincerely, because often when we have someone who's in a long-term violent relationship, they're like, I didn't see it at the beginning. He was or she was such a nice person when we first started dating. So when you're talking about not wanting a second date, those warning bells are going off really early. Please pay attention to them.
Can I just bridge this into kind of like the peripheral of this, because I'm thinking back, it just came to mind as we were talking, where you're in a new dating relationship, they've broken it off with somebody else, and it's that somebody else that is now harassing the new girlfriend or the new boyfriend. And sometimes I've seen it where that's happening anonymously. Like you've got a third party that's no longer involved in the relationship who becomes jealous about the new relationship. Well, have you seen that? Because I've known of situations where that's happened. And at first, and it might not be obvious who's doing it, but it doesn't take long to kind of figure it out, even if they're using a fake name or setting up fake accounts.
And I definitely think it's somewhat frequent to have those exes stalking both the person they used to date and the new person coming in. One of the hardest cases, I think, for people to come forward, and even the police and criminal justice system to deal with, are those ones that start out pretty anonymous. So sometimes it is a little slower. They know in their heart exactly who is doing this, but it may take the criminal justice system a minute to be able to help overcome that. But that's the lovely part that the criminal justice system could bring that maybe you and I can't do on our own.
Sergeant? Your thoughts?
If the person's anonymous, we would have ways to identify them, legal ways where we can have it all documented. Because, it's kind of difficult to pursue a case where it's like, well, I'm pretty sure it's this individual, but I don't know. We can go. You tell us that information, and we'll run with it and get the information that's needed. I wonder oftentimes that people are just doing their own detective work, which if you feel like you need to do detective work to identify someone that's harassing you, I think that's a sign that just call the police. And let them deal with it. That way we can have everything documented in such a way that the prosecution can be, we could have a victory in the court, right?
Yeah, because when the Friends Investigative Unit, as Caitlyn likes to call it, gets involved, we might mess up the digital footprint, or create a situation that doesn't lead to a resolution that's an appropriate resolution and it gets adjudicated in court, whereas some of these cases, that's exactly where it might belong. But again, I liked your piece of advice at the beginning of this. If you're feeling like this is happening, even if it's happening anonymously, start documenting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Documenting is key. Don't erase anything. I would even go as far to say that if you have told this person to stop, then you also stop communicating back. So you've told them to stop, end the conversation, and then now if they continue to text over and over and over again without any response from you, that as well makes a very good case for us.
So you might think I'm just a little like a police wannabe here if I say this, but when I was just an investigative reporter for so many years, and I would get messages from people in different stories unrelated to anything we're talking about. But the one thing I always did is I would screen grab right away and not wait, because what you find out as a television news reporter is things disappear off the internet or off of social media real quick if somebody shuts down an account, and then they may reopen another one. And now you haven't documented the previous one. So I always say if you wake up in the morning and there's something strange in, your messages on Facebook, just start screen grabbing it right away, because by afternoon, when you finally get around to it, it might have gone poof. What are your thoughts on that? Am I just being a little too over the top on that?
No, I don't think so, because if they do delete it, then it's even difficult for us to get that information. Now, if we're aware of it, and we send the company, say Facebook, a preservation letter. So we're asking them preserve the account regardless of what the owner does with this account. If they erase it, then we've got it and we're good. But if they erase it and we don't know about it and it's been a week or two, it's possible that it's just gone forever. So I don't think I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And it's even helpful to screen grab their account name. Because sometimes you don't remember exactly what it is, and then it's just easier for law enforcement if you have like that whole account name there. That's helpful.
And I also suggest the individual screenshot what they're communicating back. So if I am telling someone, leave me alone, I'm screenshotting my own messaging just so that I'm not tempted to go talk to that person alone. I instead am doing it in a way that's preserved and sterile and keeps me safe, and I will have no problem handing that over to a detective to show the date and time I told this person to knock it off.
Shows the full story. Yeah, that's important. As far as Debbie kind of alluded to this on the side of if you notice you're changing your behavior, that's a signal. But I'm wondering if you are being stalked or harassed, is there something you should be doing to protect yourself, like changing your routine or anything like that?
So what I recommend is, and individuals can do this with any number of ways to do it. They can do it through a police department or through a stalking resource center, or just get on the internet and look around, but creating a safety plan. And that is, if I turn out of the parking lot and I think someone's following me, I know where a gas station with really good surveillance cameras are and bright lights. And if I'm scared, I could go there. I could make 4 left-hand turns and basically make a circle. And if someone's followed me through all of those, now I might call the police and say, I'm pretty sure this person is following me because they followed me in a very circular pattern of travel. It can be things like not going out to my car alone after being on a date or at a bar. My son went on a date a little while ago, and his date brought a couple of her friends with. And I was like, good for her. What a lovely place she was in to say, it's a first date. I just met this guy online. I'm going to bring a couple girlfriends with me. They sat over in the corner. Might have been a little awkward for a first date, but it was a really smart plan for someone who'd never been on a date with this person before. So there's a lot of menu of choices out there, and it's a very individual decision. Each of us have a different pattern and how comfortable we are with confrontation. But figuring out where that is and having a game plan before, and there's lots of experts to guide someone through how to make that plan.
I love and you don't have to bring your friends with you. I like that idea, but you could also just tell someone, I'm going on a date. This is everything I know about this person, and this is where we're going on the date, and this is when you should expect me home.
Yep. That's what I have, my own surveillance unit. I'm going to make Caitlyn part of that when I won't be going on a date for a long time. That's been settled. That's settled law. But when I do, I screen grab the photos on the dating app. I send all the information. I mean, my surveillance team knows more about my date than maybe I do, and any phone numbers or any contact information that I've figured out. And everybody's tracking me. And we've talked about this in previous episodes of our podcast. I make sure my surveillance team is not going to bed at like 7 o'clock at night. You know what I mean? So they're not checking on me until 7 o'clock the next morning. They have to be engaged, because I've had a couple of friends over the years be part of that team. And they're like, oh, yeah, we forgot you were on the date. Well, that's not helpful. You know, I'm fine. Thanks for asking. I kept texting you after the date to call you and tell you how terrible it was, but you weren't answering. It's like, oh, I was asleep. One of the tips that I got on a social media video I got about that I posted about a friend of mine who had gone on a date. It did not go well, but she had driven separately. That's another safety tip that we talk about a lot, is you drive separately. And he kept badgering her to meet at another location after the date. And she felt extremely pressured. She wasn't interested. She finally, after, a lot of pressure from him and feeling kind of somewhat intimidated, she said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and meet you at this other location. Well, this was just her opportunity, which I thought was super smart, to get away from the guy, because he thinks they're going to this other location and going to meet there. And then she just went ahead and drove home. And one of the tips in my comments was, you can always drive to a police substation or a police department or even a fire station if you know. Now, they're not always all fully staffed up, especially if it's super late at night, if it's the substation. But I thought that was also a great tip. It's like, well, I'm turning now, if they happen to follow you, or, if you feel that uncomfortable about how it ended, I was like, that's a great tip. Kind of know the area and know, your Google map to the local police department.
And I think that's the nice part about a safety plan, is instead of making that decision in that moment when that person is applying all this heavy pressure, you've already thought about, where would I go? What are the 24-hour businesses around my house? I mean, it's sad that this is the decision making you have to make, but I think it's a really healthy, good part of setting those boundaries just for yourself beforehand. What am I interested in doing on this date? When do I just want it to be coffee at the coffee shop and that's it? And I've made that decision beforehand, so no amount of manipulation or gaslighting or flattery or whatever changes my opinion.
And I think this sort of thing can happen. I mean, even if you're not on a date or just went on a date. This happened to one of my friends where she was just driving home, and on I-15 she noticed a car was following her. She called the police, and they guided her to I think the police department or a gas station, and a cop met her there. So this has happened.
Really?
Yeah. This happened to my friend. Same person also found an AirTag on her car, different years apart, but just these sort of things have happened to friends of mine, and certain things like that are just in my mind. Like if I go to Walmart or some store a little bit later in the day, I get nervous that someone might just be following me out and stuff like that. So I'm always scanning and stuff like that.
Can we back up? How in the heck did she notice a car was tracking her?
I don't remember.
I drive a lot looking in my rearview mirrors, but I've been a TV news reporter for a long time, and there's been incidents in my reporting job where people aren't happy with my stories, and that can sort of escalate to a possible security issue. But that's where I got my training, and your friend's amazing.
I think so. I think she was driving kind of a longer distance, and so she had been driving for a while, and she just noticed that he kept kind of following as she changed lanes.
Yikes.
This person, and she was on the phone with me, and I was like, just call the police. I genuinely don't know what to do.
But that's a great tip.
She was alone, and I think the guy ended up getting arrested because he had been doing this to a few other people, and I don't know what his intentions were, but it's terrifying to me. That you just never know.
The fact that she was heads up 7-Up driving and noticed, I think that's, as we're leaving dates and we don't know, again, we've met a perfect stranger for the first time, and perhaps they've done a little more research on us than we thought, and they're extremely interested in us. Sergeant, what should we be doing? What should we be driving with our eyes in the rearview mirror?
Well, I don't want to make everyone paranoid.
That's my job. It's always been my job. But this just reminds me that we just have to be a little cautious.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that I've done in my own life to make sure that I'm safe. I don't go jogging with both headphones in, right? So I can hear what's going on around me. I always held my keys in my hand because my dad told me I could use them as a weapon if I needed to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was before I was a police officer, but when I was in college, I would do that. Just being aware of your surroundings. I, as well, always look at the rearview mirror, and I also don't like it if people pull up right up next to me. I'll like inch further so they can't see right into my car, but I think I'm just a little more paranoid.
I don't like that either. I get that.
Okay.
Well, I think the
good.
more we talk about this, I think the more we find we all have in common.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's like we can feel paranoid, and I've been called that before. But the thing is I'm the first defense to my own safety.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think, and I don't, empower myself or whatever word we want to use. I just think the awareness level, like you can just get in a trance sometimes when you're driving and you've left a date. Maybe it's not going to be a second date, but you don't know what that person is thinking. I mean, we just don't know these people. And that's where my mind keeps going, is like, how can I just protect myself by taking even the smallest of steps?
I think like with the dating apps, when you haven't met this person in person, you've just been talking to them on the dating apps, a good first date may be at a mall, in a coffee shop, because you're not driving up. There's not a parking lot where they see you arrive. You're just parking at the mall. You're walking through the mall and go to like the Starbucks or something.
Yes.
And there's plenty of people around. Have it in the middle of the day. And I think that also is a more relaxing first date anyways, because first dates suck, right? They're just so it's a short date. So if it's going badly, you don't have to spend dinner, but it's also it's safer in a mall because there's all these different stores. You don't have to go directly back to your car after the date. You could go shop around or go to different. So if you feel like they're following you, then that's as opposed to parking in a parking lot
It's
in the
a small
evening,
parking lot.
and they see your car. They
Right.
can easily follow you if that's their intent. And this way you can have that, you can be more anonymous or more
I
secretive,
love that
I guess.
because I'm usually meeting at a small coffee shop like this. There's plenty of quaint coffee shops to go to, but the thing of it is like that's probably not the safe. And then after you get through with the date at the mall, you're like, I have to go get a birthday gift now or something like that. So you just kind of part ways, and then you're in the mall for a little bit.
Which you've said something, taken like a Uber or something,
I've done
so you
that
don't have your
before.
car there. I don't know if
I
that's...
figure it's worth the money. It's like I've figured out that dating's not free. It costs money, whether I'm paying for the date or I'm taking an Uber to the date or I'm buying an outfit for the date. Although if it's a coffee date, it's like I'm just going to show up in whatever outfit I have in the closet. But it costs money, and so that is an Uber ride is a good investment in my safety.
And then my brain goes to being paranoid that the Uber driver's going to have to get me. But
see, at least they're vetted.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah,
They're vetted. The dating apps, we don't know what we're getting. Or even if it's a friend of a friend of a friend of an uncle. You know what I mean? It's like we just don't know what we're getting ourselves into. Let's talk about the impact that stalking and harassing has on victims. And if it's a short-term situation or a long-term situation.
And we do see both. So sometimes it's for a very intense short period of time until a boundary is set and the stalker honors the boundary. And then there is still a little period of time, like maybe my next 2 dates. I'm like, is it going to happen again? But those short-term ones where the offending party gets told, knock it off, and they stop, it does take a toll. We're sitting here talking about all the pre-date activities and the monitoring and assessing. It's because some of those emotional tolls or traumas have happened on a prior date, and it's causing us to change our behavior for the next one. So it absolutely has an impact. And then there's those long-term ones where a survivor's looking over their shoulder for the next 10 years because they don't know if that person's going to start that stalking behavior again. Our current stalking injunctions here in Utah last a couple years, and we have had people that the offender will stop the whole time the stalking injunction's in place, but as soon as it ends, they start that behavior right up again. So that long-term stalking can create real long, impactful trauma where it's really hard for a survivor to feel safe anywhere. Because with technology and tracking devices, they are constantly scanning for that danger. The reason we do some of what we do is to try to help before it gets there. And if it did get there, help with some trauma therapy options and resources to impact that and get someone back to where they can feel safe. Wholly, our goal is we want to be smart and safe and careful, but we don't want to live in fear either. So how to redirect some of those energies. When I've had survivors that we had one where the offender just kept writing letters from jail and prison. So we could keep adding a new charge on, but they were in prison for life, so there wasn't a lot of deterrent. But the survivor could still choose to not read the messages. She would let the mail sit there, and her friend would come by once a week and pull out the offender's letters and call the detective just on Fridays. So she knew she could ignore the stalking behavior all the rest of the time in her week, but Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. is when she was going to deal with it. So there are different ways to cope with it, but I think you're wise to say there is an impact. Even if it's a small one and that stalking behavior stops, you're now looking for the Uber driver as a risk, or the guy on the freeway as a risk, or the next girl I date. Is she safe? And so it does take a toll. It's not okay. We do need to find better ways to honor each other's boundaries and treat each other well. So we're not living that life of fear.
Other people's stories have done that to me. So that's where I'm currently at.
Absolutely.
I'm not living in fear, but I think about a lot of stuff, and that's why I'm hesitant with dating apps. I think it's not the main reason, but one of them. So
when does a victim deserve or get granted an injunction against their harasser or their stalker? And does it have to escalate to stalking, or can there be an injunction against texting somebody?
So in Utah, and each state's a little different, but almost everybody uses that pattern of behavior. So 2 or 3 texts might get there. At least 2 or 3 weeks of like, I told you to stop, and then this happened this week, and then you texted me next week. That's starting to get to the point where a civil stalking injunction can come into play. The nice part is civil orders have a lower burden of proof than criminal charges. So if someone's reaching out and saying the cops can't go arrest my stalker, a civil stalking injunction protection type order may be easier to get. And that typically, it does put some burden on the individual who wants it. There are free lawyers. There's steps that make it much easier, but it takes a little bit of collection of evidence and then filing a petition. And then the order is served on the stalker that says stop your behavior. And if the stalker is smart enough and reads the paperwork right, they can ask for a hearing pretty quickly. And then the petitioner has to show the proof. But if the stalker misses that window, it actually flips the other way, and the stalker must prove that they are not stalking. So it just depends a little on your state and your statute, but there are good remedies in most states to take what is day-to-day behavior and clearly define it as criminal behavior. So texting me was maybe okay the first time, and then I said it wasn't, and you did it a couple more times, but now you've been served a court order that makes it criminal contact to call me again. And the way our statute goes, they might actually be charged with both violating the stalking injunction and the very act of stalking as well. So trying to get some good consequences as soon as possible.
And this could be different in other states, and we have listeners, know, maybe all over the world listening. They would just have to check with their local law enforcement to find out how it works in their particular area. So what do you suggest, both of you, as we wrap up here, people who feel like they might be a victim, what steps do you suggest they take?
If they have questions of whether they're a victim or not, I mean, you could just call the police department.
Something simple.
Yeah, we take phone calls all the time where we just have citizens that have questions and we answer them. And if I don't have the answer, then I go find it. Right? So don't feel, I know a lot of people feel intimidated in calling the police department, even if it is just for a question or how the law works or how that would work. But absolutely just call. It's not a big deal. Happy to answer the phone and answer a phone call, answer a question per se. And if you're in fear or feel scared, again, just call us. We're happy to show up. Don't think that you're escalating things or, I mean, if it's nothing, then that's great. Then we go on our way and go to the next call. And if it's something, then we're there. So I think a lot of people are afraid to call police, and I don't know how to fix that, but just call.
Well, you're helping to fix that, because I think what we're doing here and what the Salt Lake City Police Department is doing by having both of you talk to us is we're kind of removing that veil or opening the doors to say, here's what happens, here's what your avenues are, what your pathways are, and that there are not only police officers that can help, or detectives and sergeants, but also victims specialists or victims advocates, Wendy, as well, which is a great step for a lot of people. And I'm not sure that people know that police departments all over the country and even federal agencies have victim specialists that a victim can get resources from, and that, like you said, that menu of options from, which might feel less intimidating than saying, oh, I have to, talk to a cop right off the top.
And that's the nice part. A lot are embedded in a criminal justice system, but there's a lot of victim services that are attached to nonprofits. So if you're not sure yet, you want to open that door to the criminal justice system, or talking to a cop feels not quite like the step I want to take. Start with a victim services hotline. Start with a confidential, anonymous conversation with a victim service provider. Power comes from education. So having just that knowledge of, if I do this, what will happen, often lets us make better decisions for our safety.
And I just want to know, I think some people may be hesitant to call police because they may feel like, oh, they have bigger problems going on. But you're saying it's okay just to call with a question. I like
Absolutely.
that. One other question that I just want to throw out there, because this episode may go out on Halloween. We are literally inviting people to our doorstep on Halloween with trick-or-treaters, usually innocent kids, but it's an opportunity for people to show up in masks and disguises. Do you have any tips off the top of your head just to keep us safe on Halloween? This is a curveball that I just threw at you.
Yeah, well, I would say go to a trunk or treat. I don't have trick-or-treaters come to my door at all. My community has a trunk or treat. So during Halloween, I'm with my community and I'm surrounded by people I know. And
Outside.
I know that outside.
Yeah, because that's it. Like, that's where I don't know that a lot of communities, like I grew up in Arizona, I never knew what a trunk or treat was until I moved to Utah, and they just park cars in a parking lot, right?
Yes.
Or set up booths and stuff like that, and that's where all the kids gather. Well, I have a suggestion. If you feel at all nervous because of something that's going on in your life, you can shut off the lights and not open the door. I have been sort of anti-Halloween the last year, and it is very freeing. I get to keep all the candy to myself. So that's another option. But I get it. You want to be
I feel bad for the kiddos, but I also get it because I want to just go. I go to bed at like 8, so yeah. I'm like, no.
Then you turn off and a lot of people have the Ring. I know not everyone has
a Ring doorbell
to that, but that Ring doorbell, so you can actually see who's coming up before you answer the door. But yeah,
I like that, because when I was having that issue with that man who showed up at my door, I was like, I have Ring doorbell footage of it happening. So I ended up not needing to go any. It stopped. It never happened again. But I mean, I have mixed emotions. I grew up in a generation where we didn't have any of this stuff. We didn't have dash cams. We didn't even have iPhones. I mean, I learned to type on a typewriter, not anything, not a computer or anything. So, super old school here, but I like the idea of being able to click on a doorbell cam and see who's standing at my door, especially when I've had these occasional incidents where I'm concerned about my safety. And I'm not trying to tell people how to spend their money, but they're like $99, and I think I saw them on Prime Day sale for $50. So that could be another way of just, even when you're not home, just checking to see who's showing up at your door, which is, I think you said it earlier, Wendy, it's kind of sad that we have to be in this situation that we're in, but I'd rather be smart about it than have my head buried in the sand and then find out that, I should have been more diligent about it. A very special thank you to Sergeant Liz Johnson of the Salt Lake City Police Department here in Utah, and also Wendy Isom, the Director of Victim Services at the Salt Lake City Police Department. They both work together to help domestic violence victims, stalking victims, victims who have been harassed over text messages, really work through what their options are. But I want people to know, Caitlyn, if they don't live in Utah, there are a lot of resources outside of Utah to go for help. The first place to start is your local police department. Ask for a victim specialist or a victim's advocate. Many police departments have victim specialists or advocates on hand who actually work in the police department, like Wendy does, to help answer these questions. Or ask for the domestic violence unit, but at least make that phone call to get connected with the resources within the city or the county where you live. Beyond that, there is a national domestic violence hotline number, and the great thing about the National Domestic Violence Hotline number, it is not only a free phone call, but there's also a text line that's attached. So if you're in a relationship where your partner just cannot simply be an earshot of what you're saying and you don't want them to hear the conversation, I encourage you to start that conversation by reaching out to the domestic violence hotline via text. And we're going to include both of those, not only the text line, but also the phone number in the description, in our podcast description. So check in the description, write that phone number down. If you can, put it in your cell phone and keep it with you. It may not be you who needs it, but you may be able to share it with somebody who does need your help and needs your assistance getting connected to resources.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from this conversation is how much they each said to trust your gut instinct. So if you even have a question about something, I think just making sure to tell someone and then making that phone call or text if needed. And
trust your gut and trust it sooner.
Yeah.
Right. Because I feel as though sometimes I want to second guess my own gut. And as it usually turns out, my gut is spot on. Something is telling me it's off. I got to lean into it. Trusting it sooner is far better than just waiting until it's too late.
And one of the big action steps that I know I'm going to be taking right after we're done recording this is doing a cleanup of my social media to make sure.
What's on your social media that you want to get rid of?
I just need to double check that I don't have like my hometown public, or I think she said birthday, I'm pretty sure is public. So I'm just going to go do a check of all those things and make sure that it's all private and not on there. And also when I have the time, go through my friends list, because one of my rules on I'll say Facebook is I don't like to have friends on there that I've never met in person, but I know that I've added a lot of people and it's probably been a year or two since I've cleaned that up. But as far as Instagram that I have public, just making sure that there's no information that anyone could find things that I don't want them to find out about me.
I've made a commitment to stay on the dating app.
Yeah.
Because in the past when I have given out my private or personal cell phone number to a man I barely know. In fact, I've never met him in person, but I'm willing to give out my cell phone number, which sounds like a mistake, right? Just saying that out loud is but staying on the dating app adds that layer of protection where I don't have to be concerned about if it doesn't work out, which obviously I've been dating on and off for 7 years now, and it hasn't worked out. Okay. But with any guy on a more permanent basis, just having my cell phone number out there, even though most men just kind of fade away. One big takeaway for me after this discussion is stay on the dating app, tempted to give somebody I've never met before my personal phone number. It just has all kinds of problems written all over it. And I've had issues in the past where I've received unwanted text messages in the middle of the night, in the early morning, from a man that I just wasn't interested in going on a second date with. It's okay to say no to a second date, but it's also okay to say no to not giving out my personal phone number. So staying on the dating app, I think, would help considerably in these situations, just protecting myself and my phone number. The other big takeaway for me is when I go to coffee dates. I've advocated for coffee dates because they're in the middle of the day, and it just seems like it's easy. And if it doesn't work out, nobody's forked out $100 for dinner. But the small parking lot scenario is something I had not taken into account until the sergeant with the Salt Lake City Police Department brought that up in our discussion. And she said, go to a mall. Go to a mall, park at the other end of the mall, walk through the mall, and then meet for a soda or for coffee somewhere in the mall. There's a lot of people at the mall. You're parked at the other end of the mall. Not every town has a mall. There's a lot of small towns across America. They don't have a mall, or the mall has dried up. It no longer exists. But think about other places in your vicinity that you could go. There's a lot of people. It's a larger area, and you're not in a 5-stall parking lot with somebody you've never met before.
Yeah, and I had never thought about that before. So that was a big eye-opener for me, and just makes you think twice about how you approach things.
I've had friends tell me, don't let them see your car. Now, I have taken Ubers to locations. Just for this very reason. But that's not always possible on every single date. And I tend to want to meet at let's just meet at this really quaint coffee shop that I've never been to before. And he's like, yeah, let's meet at this really quaint coffee shop. Well, hopefully most people are not going to turn into a stalker. Yeah. That has not been my experience. I've had a couple of hiccups along the way. But I like the idea of meeting in a larger space in the middle of the day, parking at the opposite of the mall. And then as you part ways, the great thing is I was like, well, I've got to go get a birthday gift, or I got to go Christmas shopping. So it's really nice to meet you. And then you're off on your way, and you're sort of meandering your way back to your car. So I thought there was a lot of really great information that came out of this, defining what stalking is, defining what electronic or phone harassment is, saving messages in the moment, also saving your message that you send back to the person to let them know that they've crossed the line, taking a screenshot of that right away, and then not contacting them again, not continuing to engage.
Yeah, and very important information. And I don't think we didn't do this episode to instill fear in people, because I think that can happen after hearing some things like this. But I think that our purpose is to educate and just be aware of all the things that can happen and ways to just, protect yourself from the beginning, middle, and end of a situation that you're in. Thanks for listening to this episode of Dating at Her Age. We have new episodes every Thursday, and today we actually have a bonus episode. In today's bonus episode, we look more into AirTags, and if there's a way to know if someone has placed an AirTag inside your car without your permission. You can find that episode and much more Dating at Her Age content on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.